Before marble became memory and before emperors called themselves gods, there was a question that haunted the hills beside the Tiber. How does a small, frightened settlement become eternal? Empires often announce themselves with thunder. Rome began with whispers, with smoke rising from shepherds' fires, with refugees clutching borrowed weapons, with a story about twins and a wolf that blurred myth and necessity. Yet from those uncertain beginnings would emerge a power so disciplined, so relentless, that it would command 3 continents and shape the political vocabulary of the world. The Roman Empire did not spring fully formed from the earth. It was built layer by layer, through fear and ambition, innovation and brutality, until the city that once feared invasion became the invader, and the republic that despised kings crowned an emperor. This is the beginning of that transformation. The geography of central Italy did not promise destiny. The Italian peninsula jutted into the Mediterranean like a spear, but it was fractured by mountains and rivers, its communities divided among Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans. Rome began as one Latin settlement among many, perched defensively on 7 hills overlooking a fordable bend in the Tiber River. Its position was practical rather than glorious. Inland enough to avoid pirate raids, yet close enough to the sea to trade, elevated enough to defend, yet accessible to surrounding plains. Survival demanded vigilance. Prosperity demanded organization. Tradition placed Rome's founding in 753 BCE, tied to the legend of Romulus and Remus. In the tale, Romulus slew his brother and claimed the city as his own, establishing a monarchy sustained by strength and divine favor. Myth and history intertwined, but beneath the legend lay a truth about early Rome. Violence and authority were inseparable. The early kings, some Latin and later Etruscan, oversaw the first structures of Roman society, religious rites, military organization, and civic institutions that would outlast them. They drained marshes to create the forum, fortified hills with walls, and laid the groundwork for a city that understood power as both sacred and practical. Etruscan influence proved decisive. From the north came techniques of engineering, urban planning, and ceremonial kingship. The Etruscan rulers introduced symbols of authority, the fasces, the curule chair, the purple-bordered toga, that would later adorn Roman magistrates and emperors alike. Yet Rome absorbed influence without surrendering identity. Even in subordination, it learned. Even under kings, it cultivated a suspicion of tyranny. By the late 6th century BCE, that suspicion erupted. According to tradition, the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, ruled with arrogance and cruelty. When his son assaulted the noblewoman Lucretia, outrage ignited revolution. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the Romans expelled their king and swore never again to be ruled by a monarch. Whether embellished or not, the story reflected a defining conviction. Freedom required vigilance against concentrated power. In 509 BCE, Rome became a republic. The Roman Republic was not democracy in the modern sense. It was an intricate balance of aristocratic dominance and civic participation. At its apex stood 2 consuls, elected annually, sharing power to prevent autocracy. The Senate, composed of elite elders, guided policy and preserved tradition. Assemblies of citizens voted on laws and elected officials. This system fostered competition and accountability, yet it was riddled with tension. Patricians monopolized authority, while plebeians, the broader populace, demanded representation and protection. The conflict of the orders defined the Republic's early centuries. Plebeians withdrew from the city in protest, threatening Rome's survival until concessions were granted. Gradually, new offices emerged. The tribunes of the plebs, empowered to veto unjust acts, written laws inscribed in the 12 tables, and pathways for commoners to attain high office. Rome's strength grew not only from conquest, but from its capacity to negotiate internal discord. Political compromise became a weapon as vital as any sword. Meanwhile, Rome fought for survival against neighboring tribes and rival cities. The Latin War consolidated its dominance over surrounding communities. Rome's approach to victory was pragmatic. Defeated enemies were not always annihilated, they were incorporated. Some received partial citizenship, others became allies bound by treaty. In exchange for loyalty and military service, they gained protection and economic integration. This flexible system expanded Rome's manpower without constant occupation. Roads stitched the peninsula together, enabling swift troop movements and communication. Each stone laid upon those roads was a thread in an expanding web of influence. The 3rd century BCE brought Rome into collision with a formidable rival, Carthage. The Punic Wars would test Rome's resilience to its core. In the First Punic War, Rome confronted Carthage's naval supremacy. With audacious improvisation, the Romans constructed a fleet and devised the Corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into infantry engagements. After decades of struggle, Carthage yielded Sicily. Rome, once a regional power, now possessed its first overseas province. But triumph bred greater trials. In 218 BCE, Hannibal Barca marched from Spain, crossed the Alps with elephants, and descended upon Italy. His victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae shattered Roman armies and sent shockwaves through the Republic. Entire legions perished. Allies defected. Panic threatened to unravel the state. Yet Rome refused surrender. It adopted a strategy of endurance under Fabius Maximus, harassing Hannibal while avoiding decisive confrontation. Simultaneously, it expanded the war to Spain and Africa. In 202 BCE, Publius Cornelius Scipio defeated Hannibal at Zama. Carthage was humbled, and Rome emerged as master of the Western Mediterranean. The consequences of victory were profound. Wealth poured into Italy. Slaves flooded the countryside. Provincial administration became a permanent responsibility. Rome's citizen soldiers returned home to find small farms absorbed by vast estates worked by enslaved labor. Economic disparity widened. The Republic's institutions, designed for a city-state, strained under imperial burdens. In the 2nd century BCE, Rome turned eastward. It defeated Macedon and subdued the Hellenistic kingdoms. Greek art, philosophy, and literature entered Roman life, reshaping elite culture. Yet expansion intensified internal contradictions. Ambitious generals commanded loyal armies abroad, accumulating glory and spoils. Political rivalry hardened into factionalism. The Gracchi brothers attempted reform. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus sought to redistribute land and extend citizenship, arguing that Rome's strength depended on a stable, empowered populace. Their efforts ignited fierce opposition. Violence erupted within the city. Both brothers were killed, and precedent shifted. Political disputes could now be settled by bloodshed. The Republic's taboo against internal violence was broken. The 1st century BCE witnessed escalating turmoil. Gaius Marius reformed the army, recruiting landless citizens and promising them rewards. Soldiers, loyalty drifted from the state to their generals. Lucius Cornelius Sulla marched on Rome itself, seizing power and instituting proscriptions against enemies. Though he later resigned, the precedent of military intervention in politics lingered ominously. Amid this instability rose 3 ambitious men, Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Their informal alliance, the first triumvirate, dominated Roman politics. Caesar's conquest of Gaul expanded Rome's territory and enhanced his prestige. When tensions with Pompey escalated, Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, declaring civil war. His victory made him dictator for life. Yet his concentration of power revived ancient fears. In 44 BCE, senators assassinated him, believing they had saved the Republic. Instead, they unleashed further chaos. Civil war resumed, culminating in the rise of Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. Through shrewd alliances and decisive battles, including Actium in 31 BCE against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian eliminated rivals. In 27 BCE, he assumed the title Augustus, carefully cloaking autocracy beneath republican forms. The Roman Empire had begun. But Chapter 1 ends before Augustus' reign unfolds. It ends with Rome poised at the edge of transformation, having evolved from village to republic, from republic to hegemon, and now from hegemon to empire. Its citizens had sworn never to accept a king, yet they had entrusted supreme authority to a single ruler. The experiment of shared governance had yielded to the promise of stability. Was this betrayal or adaptation? Rome believed it was survival. The hills beside the Tiber no longer whispered. They echoed with legions, footsteps, and senators' debates, with triumphal processions and funeral pyres. Rome's genius lay not in purity but in absorption of enemies, of cultures, of crises. Each challenge forced reinvention. Each victory carried seeds of strain. The Republic's fall was not a sudden collapse but a gradual surrender to the logic of scale. A city that ruled an empire required a new form of rule. As Augustus prepared to consolidate his authority, Rome stood at a crossroads. Peace beckoned after decades of civil war. Yet peace demanded submission to a princeps who claimed to restore tradition while quietly reshaping it. The transformation would redefine citizenship, power, and identity across the Mediterranean world. From shepherds, fires, to imperial ambition, Rome had risen by adapting to necessity and mastering discipline. But could a system born from resistance to kings endure under an emperor? The answer would determine whether Rome's claim to eternity was illusion or destiny. The Roman world did not awaken one morning to find itself an empire. It drifted there carefully, almost imperceptibly, guided by a man who understood that power survives best when it disguises itself as restoration. Gaius Octavius, now Augustus, knew the memory of Julius Caesar's assassination still haunted the Senate. Rome had killed a dictator once. It would not hesitate to kill another. And so Augustus did not call himself king. He called himself princeps, first citizen. Yet beneath that modest title, he constructed a new political architecture that would endure for centuries. In 27 BCE, Augustus theatrically offered to resign his extraordinary powers, returning authority to the Senate and people of Rome. The gesture was masterful. The Senate, grateful and cautious, urged him to remain. He accepted, granted control over key provinces and their legions. It was a compromise in appearance only. Augustus retained command of the military and the loyalty of soldiers stationed across the empire's most volatile frontiers. The Republic's forms remained intact. Consuls were elected, magistrates convened, senators debated, but the center of gravity had shifted irreversibly. Augustus' genius lay not in conquest alone, but in consolidation. After decades of civil war, Rome craved stability. He delivered it. Roads were repaired, aqueducts expanded, temples restored. He famously declared that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. This was not mere vanity. Monumental architecture projected permanence. Structures like the Ara Pacis celebrated peace under his rule, fusing religious symbolism with political legitimacy. Augustus cultivated the image of a benevolent guardian rather than a tyrant. Military reform became the foundation of his regime. Augustus reduced the number of legions, creating a standing professional army bound by oath to him personally. Soldiers served fixed terms and received pensions upon discharge, funded through a dedicated military treasury. The Praetorian Guard was established as an elite force to protect the emperor, stationed strategically near Rome. It was both shield and silent threat, a reminder that authority now rested on disciplined force. Beyond Italy, Augustus reorganized the provinces. Those considered peaceful were entrusted to senatorial governors. Those requiring military oversight remained under imperial control. This division preserved the illusion of shared governance while ensuring that the most critical regions answered directly to him. Taxation was standardized, censuses conducted, and administrative efficiency improved. For many provincials, Roman rule became predictable, even advantageous. Culturally, Augustus understood narrative as power. He patronized poets like Virgil and Horace, whose works framed Rome's history as destiny. Virgil's Aeneid traced Roman origins to the Trojan hero Aeneas, linking Augustus to divine ancestry. Literature became statecraft. By embedding his reign within epic tradition, Augustus transformed political authority into cosmic inevitability. Yet beneath the surface of order lay delicate tensions. Augustus had no blueprint for succession. Rome's aversion to monarchy persisted, and hereditary rule risked igniting resistance. He adopted heirs cautiously, grooming them for leadership while emphasizing continuity rather than kingship. When his stepson Tiberius ultimately succeeded him in 14 CE, the transition was peaceful, a triumph of political choreography. The Principate, as this system became known, had survived its founder. Tiberius inherited a stable empire but ruled with suspicion. A capable general and administrator, he lacked Augustus' charisma. His retreat to Capri fueled rumors of decadence and cruelty. In Rome, the Praetorian prefect Sejanus accumulated influence, manipulating trials for treason to eliminate rivals. Fear infiltrated the political atmosphere. Though the machinery of governance functioned, trust eroded. Tiberius' later years demonstrated a critical vulnerability of the new system. Without clear constitutional limits, imperial temperament shaped the fate of millions. The accession of Caligula in 37 CE initially inspired hope. Young and charismatic, he was welcomed enthusiastically. But within months, illness and paranoia transformed him. Extravagant spending drained the treasury. Erratic behavior alienated the Senate. Cruelty became spectacle. Ancient sources painted him as a tyrant unrestrained by sanity. Whether exaggerated or not, his assassination by members of the Praetorian Guard in 41 CE revealed a new reality. Emperors could be made and unmade by those sworn to protect them. In the chaos that followed, the Guard proclaimed Claudius emperor. Overlooked and underestimated, Claudius proved unexpectedly effective. He expanded the empire, most notably conquering Britannia in 43 CE, extending Roman influence beyond the Channel. He strengthened the bureaucracy, incorporating freedmen into administrative roles and enhancing efficiency. Yet court intrigue shadowed his reign. Poison and betrayal haunted the imperial household, culminating in his death, possibly engineered by his wife Agrippina to secure power for her son, Nero. Nero's early rule reflected promise under the guidance of advisors Seneca and Burrus. But ambition and insecurity soon prevailed. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE devastated much of the city. Though Nero initiated rebuilding efforts and imposed new urban regulations, suspicion fell upon him. To deflect blame, he persecuted Christians, marking one of the earliest imperial confrontations with the emerging faith. His artistic pursuits and perceived excesses alienated elites and military commanders alike. Rebellions erupted in the provinces. In 68 CE, abandoned by allies, Nero took his own life. His death triggered the year of the four emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian each claimed authority amid civil war. The rapid succession underscored the fragility of dynastic continuity. Ultimately, Vespasian, commander in Judea, secured victory and founded the Flavian dynasty. Stability returned through decisive leadership. Vespasian restored fiscal discipline and initiated grand construction projects, including the Flavian Amphitheater, later known as the Colosseum, symbolizing renewal after turmoil. His pragmatic governance emphasized merit and loyalty over aristocratic pedigree. Upon his death, his sons Titus and Domitian succeeded him sequentially. Titus' brief reign was marked by disaster and compassion. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE obliterated Pompeii and Herculaneum. Titus organized relief efforts, reinforcing imperial responsibility in times of crisis. Domitian, however, adopted a more autocratic posture, demanding overt displays of reverence. Though administratively competent, his intolerance of dissent fostered resentment. In 96 CE, he was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. From this instability emerged a remarkable phase often termed the era of the Five Good Emperors. Beginning with Nerva and reaching its zenith under Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, the empire experienced prosperity and relative harmony. Adoption, rather than bloodline-guided succession, prioritizing capability. Trajan expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia and campaigning in the east. His forums and markets celebrated imperial grandeur. Hadrian, recognizing the limits of expansion, consolidated borders, constructing fortifications like Hadrian's Wall in Britannia. He traveled extensively, engaging directly with provincial communities. Antoninus Pius maintained peace and administrative refinement. Under Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor and author of Meditations, Rome confronted plague and persistent warfare along the Danube. His reign embodied stoic resilience amid adversity. Yet even during this golden age, cracks formed. The Antonine Plague decimated populations, weakening manpower and economy. Military pressures intensified. When Marcus Aurelius chose his son Commodus as successor in 180 CE, the precedent of adoption ended. Commodus' erratic rule revived instability. Assassinated in 192 CE, he left behind a volatile empire. The second century's prosperity had masked structural challenges. Expansion had stalled. Revenues depended increasingly on heavy taxation. Military expenditures consumed resources. The balance Augustus crafted required competent emperors. When leadership faltered, the system trembled. Still, the transformation from republic to empire had achieved something extraordinary. For nearly 2 centuries, vast territories from Britain to Syria experienced relative peace, the Pax Romana. Trade flourished across Mediterranean sea lanes. Cities thrived. Roman law evolved into a sophisticated framework influencing diverse cultures. Citizenship gradually expanded, culminating in the Edict of Caracalla in 212 CE, which would grant citizenship to free inhabitants across the empire, though that lay in the future. Chapter 2 closes on the height of imperial confidence. Marble cities gleam under Mediterranean sun. Legions guard frontiers stretching thousands of miles. Philosophers debate virtue while merchants traverse secure roads. Yet beneath the surface, demographic strain, fiscal imbalance, and succession uncertainty gather force. Rome's experiment in disguised monarchy has proven durable, but durability is not permanence. Augustus built a system designed to conceal autocracy within republican tradition. It worked, as long as wisdom guided power. But what happens when ambition eclipses restraint? When external pressures converge with internal decay? The empire now stands expansive and luminous, yet history rarely allows such equilibrium to endure indefinitely. Beyond the Danube and the Euphrates, new confederations stir. Within the palace, rivalries simmer. The legions remain loyal for now. Rome has mastered the art of governance across continents. The question looming ahead is whether it can master itself. The empire that Augustus engineered had survived madmen, philosophers, generals, and fire. It had expanded to the limits of geography and imagination. But by the dawn of the 3rd century, Rome faced a reality more dangerous than any foreign enemy: the slow unraveling of equilibrium. Prosperity had concealed fragility. Stability had depended upon competent rulers. And now, as the 2nd century faded, the delicate machinery of imperial governance began to grind under pressure. When Commodus was assassinated in 192 CE, Rome did not merely lose an emperor. It lost the illusion that dynastic continuity guaranteed order. The following year, remembered as the Year of the Five Emperors, exposed the empire's vulnerability. Pertinax attempted reform, but was murdered by the Praetorian Guard after only 3 months. The Guard then committed an act unprecedented in Roman history. They auctioned the imperial throne to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus purchased the empire like property. The spectacle horrified the provinces and the legions alike. Power, once cloaked in ceremony, now lay naked in transaction. The frontier armies refused to accept this humiliation. 3 commanders, Septimius Severus in Pannonia, Pescennius Niger in Syria, and Clodius Albinus in Britain, each declared themselves emperor. Civil war erupted once more, not as a brief convulsion but as a harbinger of systemic breakdown. Septimius Severus emerged victorious. Marching on Rome, he disbanded the Praetorian Guard and replaced it with loyal soldiers from his own ranks. It was a decisive act that revealed a new truth. Emperors were now creatures of the army. Severus strengthened military pay and privileges, binding the legions to him personally. But such loyalty came at cost. Increased military expenditure strained the treasury. To compensate, taxation intensified and currency debasement accelerated. Severus campaigned aggressively in the East and in Britain, seeking glory and distraction from internal unrest. His reign signaled a shift from senatorial aristocracy toward military autocracy. Upon his death in 211 CE, he reportedly advised his sons, Caracalla and Geta, to enrich the soldiers and scorn all others. The advice proved prophetic and catastrophic. Caracalla soon murdered Geta, eliminating his rival in a bloody purge. His reign oscillated between brutality and administrative reform. In 212 CE, he issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. The decree expanded tax revenue and symbolized a universalizing Rome, but it also diluted the distinction that once defined Roman identity. Citizenship no longer bound a privileged minority. It encompassed a vast, diverse population. Caracalla's assassination in 217 CE inaugurated decades of instability, known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Many ruled for mere months before succumbing to rebellion or assassination. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne. Most met violent ends. External threats multiplied. Germanic tribes pressed along the Rhine and Danube frontiers, exploiting Roman distraction. In the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire replaced the Parthians, presenting a revitalized and centralized adversary. In 260 CE, Emperor Valerian was captured alive by the Persian king Shapur I, an unprecedented humiliation. Rome's aura of invincibility fractured. Simultaneously, the empire splintered internally. The Gallic Empire emerged in the west under Postumus, encompassing Gaul, Britain, and Spain. In the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra carved out an independent realm stretching across Syria and Egypt. Trade routes faltered. Cities fortified themselves. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, became vulnerable. Economic crisis compounded political chaos. Debased coinage triggered inflation. Agricultural production declined amid invasion and plague. Urban populations shrank. The Antonine Plague earlier had weakened demographic resilience. Subsequent outbreaks further destabilized labor and military recruitment. The empire seemed caught in a spiral of contraction. Yet Rome did not collapse. Amid fragmentation, resilience persisted. In 270 CE, Aurelian rose to power. A formidable soldier emperor, he reconquered the breakaway territories, defeating Zenobia and reincorporating Palmyra. He restored the Gallic provinces and fortified Rome with massive defensive walls that still bear his name. Aurelian adopted the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. For a moment, unity returned, but structural instability endured. The imperial office had become perilous. Emperors depended on military loyalty, and legions frequently elevated their own commanders. Governance required reform deeper than battlefield victories. That reform arrived with Diocletian in 284 CE. Recognizing that one man could not effectively administer such vast territories, he instituted the Tetrarchy, a system dividing authority among 4 rulers, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars. The empire was administratively split into eastern and western halves, each with its own capital and military command. This was not division as weakness, but division as strategy. Diocletian overhauled taxation, reorganized provinces into smaller units for tighter control, and expanded the bureaucracy. He sought economic stabilization through price edicts aimed at curbing inflation. Though enforcement proved difficult, the attempt reflected determination to restore order through structure rather than personality. Culturally, Diocletian emphasized imperial majesty. He abandoned Augustus' modest princeps facade and embraced overt autocracy. Emperors were now dominus lord. Court rituals intensified, reinforcing hierarchy and divine association. The transformation acknowledged what had long been reality. The empire required centralized authority unmasked by republican nostalgia. Yet his reign also witnessed one of the most severe persecutions of Christians. Viewing Christianity as a threat to unity and traditional religious practice, Diocletian launched edicts targeting churches and clergy. The persecution aimed to enforce ideological cohesion, but instead strengthened Christian solidarity. In 305 CE, Diocletian did something extraordinary. He voluntarily abdicated. The Tetrarchy, designed for smooth succession, soon unraveled as rivalries resurfaced. Civil war erupted once more, culminating in the rise of Constantine. Constantine emerged victorious after defeating Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. According to tradition, he saw a vision promising victory under the sign of Christ. In 313 CE, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance to Christians. The empire's relationship with Christianity shifted from persecution to patronage. Constantine's reign marked another transformation. He refounded the ancient city of Byzantium as Constantinople in 330 CE, establishing a new eastern capital strategically positioned between Europe and Asia. The shift reflected demographic and economic realities. The eastern provinces were wealthier and more urbanized. Rome itself, though symbolically potent, was no longer the empire's center of gravity. Under Constantine, the imperial government deepened bureaucratic complexity. Gold solidus coinage stabilized currency. Military organization evolved, distinguishing between frontier troops and mobile field armies capable of rapid response. Christianity increasingly intertwined with statecraft, culminating in the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, which sought doctrinal unity. By the mid-4th century, the Roman Empire had transformed profoundly from Augustus' Principate. It was more centralized, more bureaucratic, more overtly autocratic, and increasingly Christian. Yet the division between East and West hardened. After Theodosius I's death in 395 CE, the empire was permanently partitioned between his sons. While unity in theory remained, political reality diverged. The Western Roman Empire, with its shorter urban traditions and heavier reliance on agricultural estates, faced mounting strain. Germanic federates settled within its borders, serving as allies but retaining distinct identities. Economic contraction limited its capacity to sustain large armies. In contrast, the Eastern Roman Empire, anchored by Constantinople, possessed stronger fiscal reserves and strategic depth. Chapter 3 closes not with collapse but with divergence. Rome has survived crisis through adaptation, from republic to principate, from principate to dominate, from pagan to Christian, from unified to divided. Each transformation preserved continuity while altering essence. Yet the western provinces tremble under pressures that adaptation alone may not withstand. The Rhine frontier weakens, migration intensifies, political authority in Ravenna struggles to command distant generals. The empire that once feared no rival now contends with forces it cannot fully absorb. The story ahead is not merely of invasion, but of transformation beyond recognition. Rome will not fall in a single night. It will erode, fragment, and evolve into something new. The eastern half will endure for centuries more, calling itself Roman even as language and culture shift. By the late 4th century, the Roman Empire was no longer a single, confident organism stretching seamlessly across continents. It was a divided body, its eastern and western halves sharing memory, but no longer sharing strength equally. Theodosius had been the last emperor to rule both realms. When he died in 395 CE, authority passed to his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. What had once been an administrative convenience became a permanent fracture. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Constantinople, possessed advantages of geography and wealth. Its cities were older, its trade routes more resilient, its tax base broader. The Western Roman Empire, governed from Milan and later Ravenna, faced harsher realities. Its frontiers along the Rhine and Danube were porous. Its treasury was strained. Its political leadership often fell into the hands of court officials and military strongmen rather than visionary emperors. Yet the crisis of the West did not begin with invasion alone. It began with migration, vast movements of peoples reshaping Europe. Pressed westward by the arrival of the Huns from the Eurasian steppes, Germanic tribes sought refuge within Roman territory. In 376 CE, the Visigoths, fleeing Hunnic aggression, petitioned to cross the Danube and settle within the empire. Roman authorities agreed, but corruption and mismanagement followed. Gothic refugees were exploited, starved, and abused. Desperation ignited revolt. In 378 CE, at the Battle of Adrianople, Gothic forces annihilated a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. The defeat was catastrophic. It demonstrated that Rome could no longer easily dominate migrating peoples through conventional warfare. The Gothic threat was not a single raid, but a population on the move. Rome adapted as it had before, incorporating barbarian groups as federates. Allied communities settled within imperial borders in exchange for military service. This strategy provided manpower but diluted centralized control. Federate leaders retained authority over their own warriors. Loyalty was negotiated rather than assumed. In 410 CE, a symbolic shock reverberated across the Mediterranean world. Alaric, king of the Visigoths and once a Roman federate commander, marched on Rome itself. After failed negotiations and mounting tension, his forces breached the city. For 3 days, Rome was sacked. Though not utterly destroyed, the psychological impact was immense. The Eternal City, untouched by foreign enemy for nearly 8 centuries, had fallen. Saint Augustine, writing in North Africa, composed the City of God in response to pagans who blamed Christianity for Rome's decline. He argued that earthly empires were transient, while divine order endured. His words captured a profound shift in perspective. Rome was no longer perceived as invincible. Its destiny was no longer equated with eternity. The sack did not immediately end the Western Empire. Administration continued. Emperors still reigned in Ravenna, but authority eroded steadily. Powerful generals of barbarian origin, Stilicho, Aetius, Ricimer, dominated politics, maneuvering behind fragile imperial figures. The army, increasingly composed of federate troops, became both protector and potential adversary. In 451 CE, another formidable threat emerged. Attila the Hun. Leading a confederation of steppe warriors, Attila invaded Gaul. Roman general Aetius, allied with Visigothic forces, confronted him at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. The engagement halted Attila's advance, but at tremendous cost. Rome survived, yet survival required dependence on former enemies. Attila later invaded Italy, advancing toward Rome before retreating amid famine and disease. His sudden death in 453 CE dissolved Hunnic unity, but the underlying instability remained. The Western Empire struggled to assert sovereignty over territories increasingly governed by autonomous leaders. In 455 CE, Rome endured another sack, this time by the Vandals under King Genseric. Unlike Alaric's incursion, the Vandal sack involved systematic plunder over 2 weeks. Treasures accumulated over centuries were carried to North Africa. The term vandalism would later derive from this episode, though the reality was more complex than mere destruction. By the mid-5th century, imperial authority in the West had become ceremonial. Emperors were elevated and deposed by military strongmen. In 476 CE, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the young Emperor Romulus Augustulus. Rather than appointing a successor, Odoacer sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern Emperor as sole ruler. The Western Roman Empire had effectively ceased to exist, yet Rome did not vanish. Its administrative structures, legal traditions, and cultural identity persisted among successor kingdoms. Odoacer ruled Italy as king, maintaining aspects of Roman governance. Later, Theodoric the Great, leader of the Ostrogoths, established a kingdom in Italy that sought cooperation between Roman elites and Gothic warriors. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, often termed Byzantine by later historians, endured. Under Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century, Constantinople embarked on ambitious campaigns to reconquer lost Western territories. General Belisarius reclaimed North Africa from the Vandals and much of Italy from the Ostrogoths. For a fleeting moment, Mediterranean unity seemed possible again. Justinian also codified Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, preserving centuries of legal development. This compilation would profoundly influence European legal systems long after the empire itself transformed. Architecturally, Justinian's reign produced the Hagia Sophia, an awe-inspiring cathedral symbolizing imperial and divine authority intertwined. Yet reconquest strained resources. Wars against Persia drained manpower. A devastating plague struck in 541 CE, reducing population and weakening defenses. Italy, ravaged by prolonged conflict, became vulnerable to Lombard invasion. The dream of full restoration proved unsustainable. Over centuries, the Eastern Roman Empire evolved culturally and linguistically. Greek replaced Latin as administrative language. Christian theology permeated governance. Though its inhabitants called themselves Romans, their empire differed significantly from Augustus' creation. In the West, new kingdoms emerged: Visigothic Spain, Frankish Gaul, Anglo-Saxon England. Roman infrastructure decayed gradually, yet memory endured. Bishops inherited civic leadership roles. Monasteries preserved texts. The idea of Rome survived even as political continuity fractured. Chapter 4 closes not with a dramatic collapse, but with transformation. The Western Roman Empire fell not because of a single battle, but through cumulative pressures. Migration, economic contraction, military overextension, and internal fragmentation. It adapted repeatedly, yet adaptation reached limits. The East endured because of strategic depth, urban wealth, and administrative resilience. But it too would face centuries of challenge from Persians, Arabs, and later Turks. The Roman name would persist in Constantinople until 1453, when Ottoman cannons shattered its final walls. The fall of the West marked the end of ancient Rome as unified Mediterranean superpower. Yet it also marked the beginning of medieval Europe. Roman law, Christian institutions, and imperial memory shaped emerging civilizations. Even as marble crumbled, influence radiated outward. From shepherd settlement to imperial Colossus, from republic to autocracy, from unity to division, Rome had redefined governance across continents. Its western half succumbed to transformation, yet its eastern half carried forward the torch of continuity. The question that opened this history echoes once more. How does a small settlement become eternal? Rome's answer was not immortality of structure, but immortality of influence. Empires may fracture, capitals may shift, but ideas of citizenship, law, and order outlive the legions that once defended them. Ahead lies the deeper exploration of that endurance. How the Eastern Roman Empire navigated centuries of survival, how Christianity reshaped imperial identity, and how the legacy of Rome would be claimed, contested, and reborn in lands far beyond the Tiber. When the Western Roman Empire dissolved in 476 CE, many believed Rome's story had ended. Yet in Constantinople, the imperial court did not mourn the fall as final catastrophe. To its rulers, the empire had not collapsed, it had contracted. The Roman state still existed, still minted coins bearing the emperor's image, still commanded armies, still proclaimed universal authority. In the East, Rome endured, transformed yet unbroken. Constantinople was no provincial capital. Founded by Constantine in 330 CE upon the ancient site of Byzantium, it commanded the narrow Bosporus Strait, linking Europe and Asia. Its walls, strengthened over centuries, were among the most formidable fortifications in the world. Its harbors connected trade routes stretching from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. While the West fragmented into successor kingdoms, Constantinople flourished as a hub of commerce, culture, and imperial ambition. By the early 6th century, the Eastern Roman Empire, though increasingly Greek in language and character, still identified itself as Roman. Its emperors traced legitimacy directly to Augustus. Its administrative system preserved Roman law and taxation. Its military structure evolved but remained disciplined. And in 527 CE, a ruler ascended who would attempt to restore the empire's lost grandeur. Justinian was not born into aristocracy. He rose from modest Balkan origins through the patronage of his uncle, Emperor Justin I, yet his vision surpassed provincial beginnings. He believed the Roman Empire was indivisible, ordained to reunite the Mediterranean world under a single Christian ruler. His reign would embody both dazzling achievement and staggering cost. One of Justinian's first monumental acts was legal codification. Roman law had accumulated over centuries in decrees, edicts, and commentaries. Justinian ordered its consolidation into the Corpus Juris Civilis. This comprehensive compilation organized statutes, clarified contradictions, and established a coherent legal framework. Though intended for his own empire, its influence would echo across Europe for a millennium, shaping civil law traditions in nations yet unborn. Justinian's ambition extended beyond parchment. He sought reconquest. In North Africa, the Vandal kingdom ruled former Roman provinces. In 533 CE, Justinian dispatched his brilliant general Belisarius. Within a year, Vandal resistance collapsed. Roman authority was restored to Carthage. The victory electrified Constantinople. It seemed that destiny favored restoration. Next came Italy. The Ostrogothic kingdom, established after the Western Empire's fall, governed a land steeped in Roman heritage. In 535 CE, Belisarius launched a campaign that would span nearly 2 decades. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Rome itself endured sieges and devastation. Eventually, imperial forces prevailed, but the peninsula lay ravaged. Infrastructure decayed. Population dwindled. Victory proved Pyrrhic. Even as armies campaigned westward, danger loomed eastward. The Sasanian-Persian Empire remained a formidable rival. Warfare along the eastern frontier drained resources. Justinian's empire fought on multiple fronts, stretching logistics and finances thin. Then catastrophe struck from within. In 541 CE, a plague erupted in the empire's ports, likely carried by trade from distant regions. Known later as the Plague of Justinian, it swept through Constantinople and beyond. Contemporary accounts describe streets filled with corpses, administrative paralysis, and fear gripping the populace. Modern estimates suggest millions perished. The demographic blow weakened the empire's labor force and military recruitment, compounding fiscal strain. Yet Justinian's reign was not defined solely by war and disease. It was also an age of architectural magnificence. After riots in 532 CE, the Nika revolt nearly toppled his rule. Justinian rebuilt Constantinople on a grand scale. The Hagia Sophia rose as the crowning jewel, its vast dome seeming to float above luminous mosaics. It was more than a cathedral. It was a declaration that divine favor sustained imperial authority. The Nika revolt itself revealed underlying tensions. Sparked by factional rivalries in the Hippodrome and fueled by political grievances, the uprising threatened Justinian's throne. For days, rebels controlled large portions of the city. It was only through ruthless suppression, reportedly thousands killed within the Hippodrome, that order was restored. Justinian emerged stronger but sobered by how fragile even imperial power could be. Upon Justinian's death in 565 CE, the empire he left behind was territorially expansive but economically strained. His successors inherited both glory and burden. Within decades, Lombards invaded Italy, carving out territories that Constantinople could not fully defend. In the Balkans, Slavic migrations intensified. Persian conflicts persisted. The 7th century ushered in a more profound upheaval. Under Emperor Heraclius, the empire confronted renewed Persian aggression. In a dramatic counteroffensive, Heraclius marched deep into Persian territory, ultimately forcing a favorable peace in 628 CE. Yet triumph was fleeting. A new force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula, united under Islam. Arab-Muslim armies, energized by religious conviction and military cohesion, surged into Byzantine territories. Syria fell. Jerusalem was captured. Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, was lost. These defeats were not temporary raids but permanent territorial shifts. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, became contested waters between Christian Byzantium and Islamic caliphates. The empire adapted again. Administrative reforms reorganized provinces into themes. Military districts governed by strategoi who combined civil and military authority. This decentralization allowed quicker response to invasion and integrated soldiers more directly with local communities. The theme system would sustain Byzantine resilience for centuries. Culturally and linguistically, transformation accelerated. Greek became dominant in administration and liturgy. Latin faded from official use. Yet continuity persisted in law, imperial ideology, and Roman identity. The inhabitants still called themselves Romioi, Romans. Religious conflict also shaped the era. The iconoclast controversy of the 8th and 9th centuries divided the empire over the veneration of icons. Emperors who opposed icon worship sought to assert control over the church and purify religious practice. Opposition from clergy and populace sparked internal turmoil. Ultimately, icon veneration was restored, but the controversy revealed tensions between spiritual authority and imperial command. Meanwhile, the Western world evolved separately. The Frankish king Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in 800 CE. In Constantinople, this act was seen as illegitimate usurpation, yet it underscored Rome's enduring symbolic power. Even beyond Byzantine borders, rulers sought Roman legitimacy. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Byzantium experienced a revival. Military campaigns regained territories in Anatolia and the Balkans. Cultural flourishing marked the Macedonian Renaissance. Scholarship, art, and architecture thrived. The empire, though diminished from Justinian's aspirations, stabilized within defensible frontiers. Chapter 5 closes upon this resilient, yet altered Roman state. No longer a Mediterranean superpower, Byzantium nonetheless endured as a bridge between antiquity and medieval transformation. It absorbed shocks, restructured governance, and preserved knowledge that might otherwise have vanished. The Roman Empire had split, contracted, and redefined itself. In the West, new kingdoms built upon Roman foundations. In the East, emperors in Constantinople upheld Roman law and identity, even as language and faith evolved. Rome's survival in the East challenges simplistic narratives of fall. Empires may lose provinces, but they can retain continuity of institution and imagination. The Roman idea of universal rule, legal order, and imperial legitimacy proved adaptable across centuries. Yet endurance was not immortality. Beyond Byzantine walls, new powers gathered strength. Bulgars, Rus, Seljuk Turks. Religious schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Catholicism widened. Economic rivalry with rising Italian. By the dawn of the second millennium, the empire centered in Constantinople had endured for over 6 centuries beyond the fall of Rome in the West. It had withstood Persian invasion, Arab expansion, plague, theological division, and internal revolt. It had transformed from Latin imperial state into a predominantly Greek Christian monarchy while still calling itself Roman. Yet endurance is not stasis. The world around Byzantium was changing rapidly, and new forces were rising that would test the empire in ways unlike any before. In the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire experienced a resurgence often described as a golden age. Under emperors such as Basil II, the empire reasserted military dominance in the Balkans and Anatolia. Basil II, later remembered as the Bulgar Slayer, waged relentless campaigns against the Bulgarian Empire, culminating in decisive victory at the Battle of Claudion in 1014. Bulgaria was subdued, and Byzantine frontiers stabilized. Revenues increased, trade expanded, and Constantinople flourished as the largest and wealthiest city in Europe. This revival rested on a combination of disciplined military organization and effective fiscal management. The theme system remained functional, though increasingly supplemented by professional troops. Landholding laws attempted to prevent aristocratic magnates from absorbing small farms that formed the backbone of military recruitment. The imperial court projected splendor and ritual sophistication, reinforcing the aura of Roman continuity. Yet beneath the surface of prosperity, structural imbalances persisted. Wealth concentrated in powerful families. Military reliance shifted gradually toward mercenaries. Political rivalries within the aristocracy intensified. After Basil II's death in 1025, a series of weaker rulers struggled to maintain cohesion. Administrative competence declined, and fiscal discipline eroded. The greatest external threat of this era emerged not from the Balkans but from the East. The Seljuk Turks, a nomadic people who had converted to Islam, advanced into Anatolia. Their cavalry-based warfare proved mobile and formidable. In 1071, at the Battle of Manzikert, Emperor Romanos IV confronted Seljuk forces. The engagement ended disastrously for Byzantium. Romanos was captured, and though later released, political chaos followed at home. Manzikert did not immediately annihilate Byzantine control of Anatolia, but it shattered defensive coherence. Turkish tribes moved into the interior, establishing settlements and principalities. Anatolia had long been the empire's core recruitment ground and agricultural heartland. Its gradual loss undermined both manpower and revenue. Facing territorial erosion, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos sought external assistance. In 1095, he appealed to Western Christendom for military aid. His request intersected with broader religious fervor in Europe. Pope Urban II called for a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. Thus began the First Crusade. The arrival of Western Crusaders in Byzantine territory was both opportunity and peril. Alexios secured oaths of allegiance from Crusader leaders, aiming to recover former imperial lands. Initial campaigns succeeded in recapturing parts of Anatolia, yet distrust simmered. Cultural differences between Latin West and Greek East deepened suspicion. Despite tensions, the Komnenian dynasty, beginning with Alexios, achieved partial stabilization. Military reforms reorganized defenses. Diplomacy balanced relations with Crusader states, Italian maritime republics, and neighboring powers. Constantinople regained some strength as commercial exchange intensified. However, the crusading movement unleashed forces beyond Byzantine control. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Western armies diverted from their original objective and attacked Constantinople itself. Political intrigue, debt to Venetian financiers, and internal Byzantine rivalries culminated in catastrophe. Crusaders breached the city's walls and subjected it to brutal sack. The fall of Constantinople in 1204 marked one of the most devastating moments in Byzantine history. Churches were looted, relics stolen, palaces desecrated. A Latin empire was established atop the ruins of Roman continuity. For the first time since its founding, Constantinople was ruled by foreign Christian powers hostile to its traditions. Yet even this was not the end. Byzantine successor states emerged in exile, most notably the Empire of Nicaea. There, emperors maintained administrative structures and military organization, awaiting opportunity. In 1261, Michael VIII Palaiologos recaptured Constantinople, restoring Byzantine rule. But restoration could not erase the damage. The recaptured capital was depopulated and economically weakened. Trade privileges granted to Venice and Genoa in exchange for support empowered Italian merchants at Byzantine expense. Territorial holdings were diminished. Anatolia remained largely under Turkish control. The empire's recovery was partial and precarious. Throughout the 14th century, internal civil wars further sapped strength. Aristocratic factions vied for regency and influence. Economic decline accelerated as trade shifted toward Western maritime powers. Meanwhile, a new Turkish polity arose in northwestern Anatolia, the Ottoman Principality. The Ottomans expanded steadily, absorbing neighboring territories and establishing footholds in Europe. In 1354, they crossed into Gallipoli, securing a permanent presence in the Balkans. Byzantine emperors, lacking resources, oscillated between resistance and vassalage. Diplomatic appeals to Western Europe for aid yielded limited assistance, often entangled in theological demands for church union. As Ottoman power consolidated under leaders like Murad I and Bayezid I, Byzantine territory shrank to isolated enclaves centered on Constantinople and parts of Greece. The once vast Roman Empire had become a city-state clinging to memory. Chapter 6 closes as the medieval Roman state stands on the brink. Its walls remain formidable. Its cultural heritage remains luminous. But its manpower, treasury, and territorial base are shadows. In the 15th century, Constantinople stood as a relic of vanished immensity. Once the beating heart of a transcontinental empire, it had become an island of fading sovereignty surrounded by ascendant power. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome and guardian of a thousand-year legacy, possessed walls of stone but dwindling reserves of men and silver. Beyond those walls, the Ottoman state expanded with disciplined patience. The final reckoning was approaching. The Ottomans were not a sudden eruption. They had grown gradually from a frontier principality in Anatolia during the late 13th century. Their leaders combined military skill, political pragmatism, and religious legitimacy. By the early 15th century, they controlled vast territories across Anatolia and the Balkans. They had defeated rival Turkish emirates and subdued Christian kingdoms alike. Constantinople lay within their dominion geographically, though not yet politically. Byzantine emperors during this period navigated survival through diplomacy and concession. They negotiated marriages, paid tribute, and sought Western alliances. Yet appeals to Latin Europe were complicated by the Great Schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. Efforts to reunify the churches in hopes of military support sparked controversy among Byzantine clergy and populace. Many preferred Ottoman rule to submission to papal authority. In 1451, maimed II ascended the Ottoman throne. Young, ambitious, and intellectually formidable, Maimed understood Constantinople's symbolic weight. To conquer, it would not only secure strategic control of the Bosporus, but also legitimize his empire as successor to Rome. He prepared meticulously. Massive cannons were cast under the supervision of Hungarian engineer Urban. Fortifications were constructed on the European side of the Bosporus to control maritime access. Constantinople's defenders, under Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, numbered perhaps 7,000, a fraction of the Ottoman force estimated in the tens of thousands. Among them were Genoese mercenaries led by Giovanni Giustiniani. The city's walls, particularly the Theodosian land walls, had repelled invaders for centuries, but technology had changed. Gunpowder artillery could batter fortifications once deemed impregnable. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. Ottoman cannons roared, shaking ancient masonry. Waves of infantry assaulted breaches only to be repelled. Naval engagements unfolded in the Golden Horn. Byzantine defenders stretched limited manpower across extensive defenses. Each day eroded morale and supplies. Maimed demonstrated strategic adaptability. When Ottoman ships were blocked by a defensive chain across the Golden Horn, he ordered vessels transported overland on greased logs, bypassing the barrier. The maneuver stunned defenders and tightened encirclement. Bombardment intensified. Sections of wall crumbled under relentless fire. On May 29, 1453, after weeks of siege, the Ottomans launched a final coordinated assault. Successive waves exhausted defenders. Giustiniani was wounded and withdrew, further weakening resistance. Ottoman troops penetrated breaches. Emperor Constantine XI reportedly fought in the melee and perished, his body never conclusively identified. Constantinople fell. The sack that followed was brutal but brief by contemporary standards. Maimed soon asserted control, seeking to preserve the city as his capital. Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, yet many churches and institutions continued under Ottoman administration. Maimed adopted the title Caesari Rum, Caesar of Rome, asserting continuity rather than destruction. For Europe, the fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. For the Ottomans, it marked the beginning of imperial grandeur. The city was repopulated with diverse communities, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Turks, transforming into Istanbul, a cosmopolitan capital bridging continents. Yet Rome's legacy did not vanish with Byzantine collapse. In Western Europe, the memory of Rome had already shaped medieval political imagination. The coronation of Charlemagne in 800 had initiated the concept of a Holy Roman Empire. Later German emperors claimed Roman heritage. In Russia, the marriage of Ivan III to a Byzantine princess inspired the notion of Moscow as the Third Rome. The Renaissance, blossoming in Italian city-states, drew heavily upon rediscovered classical texts preserved by Byzantine scholars. The migration of Greek intellectuals westward after 1453 accelerated this cultural revival. Humanism, art, and scientific inquiry flourished, rooted partly in Roman and Greek antiquity transmitted through Byzantine channels. The fall also altered global dynamics. With Ottoman control over Eastern Mediterranean trade routes, European powers sought alternative paths to Asia. Maritime exploration intensified. Within decades, voyages by Columbus and Vasco da Gama would reshape global history. Thus, the fall of Rome's eastern heir indirectly propelled the Age of Discovery. Chapter 7 concludes with paradox. The Roman Empire, in its final institutional form, ceased to exist in 1453, yet its influence expanded beyond former borders. Ottoman rulers claimed Roman succession. European monarchs invoked Roman symbolism. Legal traditions codified under Justinian continued to guide jurisprudence. Architectural forms inspired new monuments. The empire that began as a settlement on 7 hills had endured in varied forms for over 2 millennia. From monarchy to republic, from principate to dominate, from unified Mediterranean power to Byzantine remnant. Its final fall did not erase its imprint. Instead, it dispersed that imprint across emerging civilizations. As the medieval world transitioned toward early modern transformation, Rome's shadow stretched long. The question was no longer whether Rome ruled territories, but how Rome lived on in institutions, faiths, and ambitions of those who followed. The final chapters will explore how Roman ideas shaped the modern world, how its political experiments influenced revolutions, and how the rise and fall of this colossus continues to inform our understanding of power, resilience, and impermanence. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the political structure of the Roman Empire ended. But Rome had never been merely a government. It was an idea, a vocabulary of power, law, citizenship, and destiny. Long after the imperial throne vanished, rulers across continents competed to inherit its mantle. The death of the empire gave birth to a legacy struggle that would shape the modern world. In Western Europe, the Holy Roman Empire had already claimed continuity centuries earlier. Though politically fragmented, it embodied the belief that imperial authority derived from Roman precedent. German emperors crowned by the papacy saw themselves as successors to Caesar and Augustus. The title was aspirational as much as practical, reflecting Rome's enduring symbolic gravity. Meanwhile, the papacy itself asserted spiritual inheritance. The Bishop of Rome claimed primacy not through legions but through apostolic authority. As medieval Europe developed, the Church preserved administrative structures reminiscent of imperial governance, dioceses, canon law, centralized hierarchy. The Roman concept of universal jurisdiction found new expression in ecclesiastical form. In Eastern Europe, Muscovite rulers cultivated the doctrine of the Third Rome. After marrying Sophia Paleologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor, Ivan III of Russia adopted Byzantine court rituals and symbols. Moscow positioned itself as heir to Orthodox Christianity and imperial mission. The Roman legacy had become transferable, adaptable to new geographies and identities. Yet inheritance was not limited to crowns and titles. Rome's most enduring gift lay in law. The Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled under Justinian, resurfaced in Western Europe during the 12th century. Universities in Bologna and elsewhere studied Roman legal principles, influencing emerging civil law systems. Concepts of contracts, property rights, and legal procedure derived from Roman jurisprudence embedded themselves in continental frameworks. Political thought likewise drew upon Roman experience. Renaissance humanists revisited classical texts, Cicero, Livy, Tacitus, exploring themes of republican virtue, tyranny, and civic responsibility. Niccolò Machiavelli analyzed Roman history to extract lessons about power and stability. The Roman Republic became both inspiration and cautionary tale. Across the Atlantic centuries later, Architects of the United States studied Roman models. The structure of a senate, the language of republic, even neoclassical architecture reflected admiration for Rome's experiment in governance. Yet they also contemplated its fall, wary of concentration of power and erosion of civic virtue. In art and architecture, Rome remained template and muse. Renaissance builders imitated classical columns and domes. Enlightenment cities adopted neoclassical forms to signal rational order and permanence. Even modern capitals echo Roman aesthetics, embodying continuity between antiquity and present. Language itself carried Rome forward. Latin, once administrative tongue of empire, became the language of scholarship, science, and liturgy for centuries. Romance languages evolved from colloquial Latin spoken across provinces. Everyday speech in Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, and Romania traces lineage to Roman soldiers and settlers. The calendar, the alphabet, and legal terminology preserve Roman imprint. Months bear names linked to emperors. The Julian calendar shaped timekeeping until refined in the Gregorian reform. Words such as Senate, justice, civic, and republic descend from Roman political vocabulary. Yet legacy is not only institutional, it is cautionary. Rome's rise illustrates adaptability, incorporation of diverse peoples, pragmatic governance, infrastructural ambition. Its fall demonstrates consequences of overextension, internal division, and reliance on military authority detached from civic accountability. Historians debate Rome's decline endlessly. Was it economic stagnation, military overstretch, moral decay, climatic shifts, pandemic disease? The answer lies not in singular cause but convergence. Rome fell differently in East and West, gradually rather than abruptly. It transformed more than it vanished. The Roman military system influenced later armies, disciplined legions, engineering corps, logistical planning. Medieval fortifications echoed Roman precedents. Even modern concepts of professional standing armies reflect evolution from Roman foundations. Religiously, Rome's adoption of Christianity reshaped Europe. The fusion of imperial structure with Christian doctrine produced Christendom, a civilizational identity spanning centuries. The bishopric of Rome became the papacy. Constantinople developed Orthodox tradition. Rome's transformation from pagan empire to Christian civilization remains one of history's profound pivots. Economically, Roman trade networks foreshadowed globalization. Mediterranean integration facilitated exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, ports, illustrated how connectivity amplifies power. Modern states emulate such integration through highways, rail, and digital networks. Yet Rome also offers warning about inequality. Vast estates worked by enslaved labor destabilized republican balance. Concentration of wealth undermined civic cohesion. Political polarization and erosion of norms preceded autocracy. Lessons resonate beyond antiquity. Chapter 8 closes not with empire but with inheritance. Rome's physical dominion dissolved. Rome's story stretches across more than 2 millennia, yet its power over the human imagination remains immediate. It is invoked in parliaments and military academies, in university lectures and political rhetoric, in architectural blueprints and cinematic epics. Why does Rome endure not merely as a subject of study, but as a mirror held up to every ambitious civilization that follows? Part of the answer lies in scale. Rome began as a modest settlement and rose to command territory spanning from Britain to Mesopotamia. Its expansion was not accidental. It combined disciplined military organization, infrastructural mastery, and political pragmatism. Roads allowed legions to move with speed. Aqueducts sustained urban growth. Law structured diverse populations into a coherent administrative order. Rome did not simply conquer, it integrated. Yet integration required compromise. Rome extended citizenship gradually, transforming former enemies into stakeholders. The social war in the 1st century BCE demonstrated the cost of exclusion. When Italian allies revolted demanding citizenship, Rome ultimately conceded. Inclusion strengthened the state. The lesson reverberates across centuries. Durable power often depends on the capacity to expand identity. Rome's republican experiment remains central to its mystique. The balance between consuls, senate, and assemblies aimed to prevent tyranny through distributed authority. Civic virtue, the belief that citizens must subordinate private ambition to public good, formed ideological foundation. But virtue proved fragile. Economic disparity, personal rivalry, and military ambition destabilized equilibrium. When generals commanded personal loyalty from professional armies, republican norms eroded. The Rubicon crossing symbolized the moment institutional restraint yielded to individual dominance. The transition to empire under Augustus demonstrated another dimension of Roman adaptability. Rather than abolish republican forms, Augustus preserved them in appearance while centralizing authority in practice. Stability returned, trade flourished, and relative peace prevailed for generations. Was this a betrayal of republican ideals or pragmatic evolution? Rome suggests that political systems may transform without immediate collapse, yet such transformation carries long-term consequences. Imperial Rome reveals the paradox of expansion. Conquest generated wealth and security, but also administrative complexity. Provinces required governance, frontiers required defense. As territory expanded, the cost of maintenance rose. Overextension strained resources and forced reliance on military loyalty. The crisis of the 3rd century illustrates how external pressure combined with internal fragmentation can destabilize even vast empires. Religion further reshaped Roman identity. Initially tolerant and polytheistic, Rome integrated local deities into its pantheon. Yet the rise of Christianity introduced exclusivity incompatible with traditional cultic pluralism. Persecution failed to extinguish the faith. Constantine's conversion and Theodosius' endorsement transformed Christianity from marginal sect into imperial doctrine. The empire did not merely adopt a religion. It fused governance with theological authority. This fusion influenced medieval Europe profoundly. Rome's fall in the West has often been portrayed as sudden catastrophe. Yet archaeological and textual evidence reveal gradual transformation. Urban centers declined unevenly. Trade networks contracted regionally rather than universally. Germanic leaders adopted Roman titles and administrative practices. The fall was less extinction than metamorphosis. The Eastern Roman Empire's survival challenges simplistic narratives. Byzantium endured for nearly 1,000 years after 476 CE. It preserved classical texts, refined Roman law, and served as cultural conduit between antiquity and the Renaissance. Its resilience demonstrates that identity can persist even amid linguistic and cultural evolution. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 marked the final political termination of Roman statehood. Yet even maimed II claimed Roman succession. Rome had become symbol of universal sovereignty. To conquer, it was to inherit its prestige. Modern states often compare themselves to Rome at moments of triumph or anxiety. Military superpowers evoke Pax Romana to describe global influence. Critics warn of imperial overstretch reminiscent of late antiquity. The analogy is imperfect yet persistent because Rome encapsulates the full arc of rise, dominance, fragmentation, and legacy. Scholars analyze Rome's environmental context as well. Climate fluctuations may have influenced agricultural output. Pandemics, such as the Antonine and Justinian plagues, disrupted demographic stability. No empire exists in isolation from ecological forces. Rome's experience underscores the vulnerability of complex systems to unforeseen biological shocks. Economically, Rome illustrates both integration and inequality. Mediterranean trade fostered interdependence, yet wealth concentrated among elites, while reliance on enslaved labor distorted economic development. When free citizens lost land and opportunity, political instability intensified. The tension between elite accumulation and broad-based prosperity echoes across history. Culturally, Rome excelled at absorption. Greek philosophy enriched Roman education. Eastern religions found followers in Roman cities. Provincial elites adopted Roman customs while retaining local traditions. This cultural hybridity contributed to longevity. Empires that rigidly resist adaptation often fracture more quickly. Leadership also mattered profoundly. Competent emperors such as Trajan and Hadrian balanced ambition with restraint. Marcus Aurelius faced plague and war with stoic resolve. Conversely, erratic rulers accelerated instability. The Roman system magnified the character of its leaders because institutional constraints weakened over time. Chapter 9 pauses before final reflection. Rome's history is neither simple triumph nor inevitable collapse. It is a study in complexity, of systems adapting to scale, of ideals compromised for stability, of power sustained through innovation yet undermined by internal division. The enduring fascination with Rome stems from recognition. Modern societies grapple with polarization, inequality, military engagement abroad, and questions of civic identity. Rome offers precedent without prescription. It demonstrates that greatness and fragility coexist. As we approach the conclusion of this epic, empires rise in confidence and fall in complexity. Rome did both with unparalleled magnitude. From a cluster of huts beside the Tiber to a dominion stretching across 3 continents, from republic to autocracy, from pagan pantheon to Christian empire, Rome became the archetype against which all later powers would measure themselves. And yet, for all its triumphs, Rome could not escape the central law of history. No structure, however formidable, is immune to time. The Roman Empire's legacy is not a single inheritance, but a constellation of enduring influences. It shaped the political imagination of Europe, the legal foundations of civil society, the architecture of cities, and the vocabulary of governance. Even in its collapse, it transmitted continuity. But the deeper lesson of Rome lies not in monuments or manuscripts. It lies in the patterns embedded within its ascent and decline. Rome rose through disciplined expansion and pragmatic inclusion. It did not merely conquer enemies. It offered them incorporation. Citizenship expanded gradually, transforming outsiders into participants. Roads connected provinces not just physically but economically. Law provided predictable structure across diversity. In its prime, Rome understood that stability required integration, yet expansion carried strain. The very scale that signaled strength demanded constant defense. Frontier pressures required standing armies loyal to commanders. Economic disparities widened as wealth concentrated among elites. Political norms eroded under the weight of personal ambition. When institutions failed to adapt proportionally to scale, authority shifted toward individuals capable of imposing order by force. The transformation from republic to empire did not occur in a single coup. It unfolded through crises that exposed weaknesses. Civil wars justified extraordinary powers. Extraordinary powers normalized autocracy. Augustus stabilized Rome brilliantly, but his solution embedded dependency on imperial competence. When emperors were wise, the system flourished. When they faltered, structural fragility surfaced. Rome's fall in the West illustrates convergence rather than singular catastrophe. Migration, economic contraction, military overextension, and administrative fragmentation converged over generations. Adaptation prolonged survival, yet adaptation itself required resources increasingly scarce. The empire did not collapse in a night of flames. It thinned, fractured, and evolved into successor states carrying fragments of Roman identity. In the East, Byzantium demonstrated resilience beyond expectation. For 1,000 years after the Western fall, emperors in Constantinople maintained Roman law, imperial ceremony, and strategic defense. Yet even Byzantium eventually confronted forces it could not repel indefinitely. The Ottoman conquest in 1453 ended political continuity, but not cultural transmission. Rome's endurance as idea surpasses its endurance as state. Legal systems across Europe derive structure from Roman jurisprudence. The concept of a Senate echoes in modern legislatures. Republican ideals, revived during the Enlightenment, drew inspiration from Roman civic virtue and cautionary tales of corruption. Even the architecture of modern capitals, domes, columns, triumphal arches, signals continuity with Roman aesthetic language. Language itself testifies to persistence. Romance languages evolved from Latin spoken by soldiers and settlers. Scientific terminology, ecclesiastical vocabulary, and academic tradition bear Roman imprint. The calendar marking our months preserves imperial names. These are not relics. They are living remnants of Roman presence woven into daily life. But Rome's legacy is not solely constructive. It warns of concentration of power detached from accountability. It demonstrates how economic inequality can destabilize civic trust. It reveals how reliance on military authority may secure borders, yet erode political balance. It underscores that institutions must evolve as scale increases, or risk obsolescence. Rome also exemplifies adaptability. It absorbed Greek philosophy, Eastern religions, and provincial elites. It reorganized administration during crisis. It shifted capitals when geography demanded. Its survival across centuries owed much to willingness to transform identity while preserving core principles of order and governance. The Roman Empire's story resists simple moralization. It was capable of remarkable tolerance and ruthless brutality, administrative brilliance and catastrophic miscalculation. Its roads facilitated trade and troop movement alike. Its law protected property and enforced hierarchy. Its peace fostered prosperity even as its expansion subjugated millions. What then is Rome's ultimate lesson? Perhaps it is this: power endures when it balances strength with inclusion, ambition with restraint, expansion with consolidation. Rome succeeded when it integrated diversity into coherent structure. It faltered when internal cohesion fractured under inequality and rivalry. Modern nations often compare themselves to Rome at moments of supremacy or anxiety. The analogy is imperfect but instructive. Rome's lifespan reminds us that dominance is not permanence. Infrastructure, military might, and economic reach cannot substitute for resilient institutions and shared civic identity. The hills of Rome still stand. The Colosseum's arches frame modern sky. In Istanbul, the Hagia Sophia's dome rises above centuries of transformation. These structures testify to human capacity for grandeur, yet they also testify to impermanence. Empires build in stone, but time writes in erosion. Rome did not know it would become metaphor. Its citizens believed in destiny, in eternity inscribed upon marble. But eternity proved relative. The empire lasted longer than most political entities in recorded history, yet it too yielded. What survived was influence, diffused through law, language, religion, and imagination. The entire history of the Roman Empire is not merely chronicle of battles and emperors. It is a study of how civilizations organize power, how they negotiate identity, and how they respond to crisis. It is a narrative of ambition disciplined by structure, of structure strained by scale, of scale undone by complexity. In the end, Rome teaches humility. No empire, however vast, escapes change, but it also teaches aspiration. Institutions built with foresight can endure beyond founders. Ideas rooted in adaptability can outlive territory. From the shepherd fires beside the Tiber to the thunder of Ottoman cannons against Constantinople's walls, Rome's arc spans the breadth of recorded Western history. It rose through innovation, endured through reform, fractured through convergence of pressures, and lived on through legacy. The Colossus fell, but its shadow remained.